What's going on, guys? Sawyer here, back out here on a beautiful Friday, still recovering from my long sick break. For those of you that didn't know, I had a flu and a fever for 5 days, a terrible cough, and the cough still hasn't subsided, but things are starting to slowly get better. It was brutal though. I couldn't go to the gym for a full week. I was stuck only to the confines of my room, but I'm getting better now. However, during that long period of illness, I was highly tempted by lust. Especially as my week of sickness progressed, I was feeling more and more temptations to go check the sites or go check girls that I was lustful over. Today I'm going to give you guys a little breakdown about how to overcome lust when you can't flee and when you're sick. Now, we as men know the number one strategy to beating lust, and that's to flee from it. Paul calls us in 1 Corinthians 6:18 to flee sexual immorality, and that's typically my go-to strategy when fleeing lust. That's probably a lot of your guys' as well. However, when I was sick, I was stuck with my electronics in my room. Again, I couldn't go out because I didn't want to get others sick, and I didn't want to get myself more sick. So I was in my room with my iPad and my phone, and that's typically where I've busted a nut in the past. And that's where a lot of you guys do it too, because Satan knows that your room is your secret place, and he knows to get you in that secret place because nobody's ever going to know that you sinned. Nobody's ever going to know that he got you. And that's typically where he attacks you with lust. So what do you do when you can't flee? Well, first off, you need to fully reject your association to things associated with lust, such as porn. Not just by saying no to the temptation to jack off yourself, but by also confirming that you stand for the exact opposite as the source of the temptation. Understand, guys, that whenever you are tempted to do any sin, let alone when you feel the urge to masturbate out of lust, that temptation comes from Satan. To fully deny Satan, to fully get him out, you need to not just flee from him, but you need to flee to his kryptonite, which is God. So what does fleeing to God look like? Well, you need to remind yourself that you are a lover of God and you are a child of God, and that identity alone should disassociate you from any temptations to sin. Many of you guys know how Peter cowered out of dying on the cross during the crucifixion, but many don't recall how Peter got his redemption with Jesus, or more specifically, how Christ redeemed him. This is in Peter 21:15-19. And Jesus simply asked Peter, "Do you love me?" He asked Peter if he loved him 3 times, and Peter said yes all 3 times. And to really show his love, Jesus gave Peter a task to do in feeding his sheep, and Peter, being the obedient man that he was, he fed them. And all of this was enough for Peter to really begin his path to repentance for his sins. And Peter ultimately went on to emerge as the leader of the apostles once Jesus rose into heaven. Peter's story shows that having an identity in God alone is vital to really denying any temptations to sin and also repenting from them when they happen. And sin will inevitably happen. I mean, we all fall short, guys. But as Proverbs 24:16 states, a righteous man may fall 7 times and rise again. Reaffirming identity as a child of God is really helpful when battling lust, but that isn't enough. If the devices that cause you to sin are right in front of you, such as your electronics, you're still going to be highly tempted to pick them up and relapse. So how do we deal with temptations to sin when the things that cause us to sin, the things that cause us to lust, the things that we beat our meat on, such as our screens, how do we deal with that when the screens are right in front of you? Well, Matthew 5:30 states that if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable that one of your members perish, one of your members being, well, hopefully it doesn't mean your hand, but it could mean your phone, or it could mean, cutting off a friend that's toxic. It's better for one of your members to perish than your whole body to be cast into hell. It typically meant hiding things such as my phone and my iPad in places where I couldn't see. And you see, guys, I typically work on devices such as my phone. So I could remember me just laying in bed and thinking like, I could be doing something productive right now, but instead I'm just out here laying here doing naught. But I know, and God knows, and my spirit knows that he would have rather preferred me to do naught, to do nothing productive, rather than me trying to do aught and finding myself searching something online that I shouldn't be. Another thing that I used to cut off sites that were causing me to relapse was blockers. Blockers are mobile apps or computer extensions that, well, They block sites that are distracting or inappropriate. The two blockers that I had on my phone, one of them was AdBlock Pro, a site that requires a paid subscription for full use. And of course, that's obvious why. We pay to get the best stuff in this society. But this, luckily enough, this app allowed me to have one free feature. And I used that one free feature to block the really bad adult/pornography sites. Then I downloaded Refocus and I put the specific URLs of places where I'd specifically find myself lusting. For me, I used it to block the social medias of the one particular girl that was causing me the most issues. I used it to block her links essentially. For you guys though, you guys can perhaps use it to double block some of the adult sites that AdBlock already blocked with their block adult site slider. Or you can do exactly what I did and use it to block the URLs of specific websites or social media accounts that give you trouble. This is just a few suggestions for how you can use blockers, but understand that they are necessary to use if you want to beat a porn addiction. However, a blocker won't work if you have certain social media apps already downloaded on your phone. So make sure that apps such as Instagram and YouTube are deleted and you only use those platforms on desktop instead of mobile. AdBlock and Refocus aren't the only options for blockers either. There's plenty of other good options for blockers for both phone and computer that can help keep you away from the sites that you shouldn't be on. It was really through those two strategies, reaffirming my identity as a child of God and also cutting off the very things that were causing me to lust, that I almost went a full week of sickness without relapsing. Now, I will state that my system wasn't perfect. I did find some loopholes and I did end up checking the social media of the main girl who was giving me lust issues a couple of times. And ultimately, on the last day of the sickness, I unfortunately ended up relapsing. And the reason why I ended up having this relapse and a few slip-ups is because being sick and being inside of your house gives you a lot of time on your hands to, I don't know, go check sexually provocative pixels on a screen, such as porn stars or Instagram models, you know what I mean. The best way to use your identity of a child of God to reject and cut off lust, the best way to do it is to go outside. Now, when you have the flu, you obviously shouldn't be going outside. You should be resting, you should be refueling. However, in normal circumstances, when you're feeling healthy and strong, you should be out in the trees and out in the bushes and out in the sun. It's harder to be tempted by lust when you're outside at the gym or at school or at work or at the park, because no man ever thinks when they're sitting in the middle of the Phil's coffee, oh, let me go on SimCity and Pornhub and beat my meat. Because the people sitting next to him are going to think that he's weird and he's likely going to get kicked out of the place. He might even get thrown in jail like the guy who tried to masturbate at a Walmart. You'll definitely get fired if you try to check that explicit model on the gram at your job. So understand that the more you go outside, the less you're going to relapse to porn, because the less you're really going to be tempted to do so. That stigma and peer pressure to not beat your meat out in public, it exists for a number of obvious reasons. We know that porn is unacceptable to 95% of society. It's banned from most workplaces. It's frowned upon in the West and most of the world, actually really all of the world. It's only the fact that in the last 20 years that porn has become so widespread through magazines first and then through the internet that it's begun to become regular in most people's private lives, especially most men's private lives. The way to beat a private porn addiction is to live a more public, outgoing life. One with a lot of people around you and less settings that tempt you into lust and more settings that move you forward into bigger and better things. And yes, even as the average man beats his meat regularly, just know that that behavior is not celebrated in this society. Everyone has a conscience, and pretty much everyone knows that that type of action is not only weird, but it's also highly toxic to society as well. If you know anything about history, then you know what happened to the Romans when they let sexual immorality and degeneracy take control of their society. They and their cities got sacked harder than Russell Martin after controlling 80% of the possession and losing 80% of his matches. A Russell Martin that should have never managed in the Premier League, but as a Leeds fan, we don't talk about that. Leeds banter aside, we look at the Romans and we know that we don't want that to be us. Yet we blindly allow the degeneracy to take hold through our actions. We need to stop the actions that are centered around dirty, unbased pleasure. And one of those actions is watching pornography. Pornography must be stopped. Titus 2:11-12 states that by the grace of God brings salvation that has appeared to all men, teaching us that we are to deny ungodliness and worldly lust in favor of living soberly, righteously, and godly in this present day. God is literally calling us to deny such things such as porn, casual sex, hookups, and He's calling us to live a more sober, pure, and celibate lifestyle instead. You notice, I notice, the girls notice, the people who work in factories and offices notice. It's been well known that you need to not just get on NoFap, but complete semen retention as well, which means not just abstaining from porn, but also abstaining from casual sex. Will it be hard to get on at first? Absolutely, but the steps that I've given you, identifying yourselves as a child of God, cutting off the things that cause you to lust, and getting outside the flee sexual immorality, these are steps that should help you move towards a path of purity. I've rambled on for far too long today, but if you guys implement the tips that God through me has given to you guys in this video, I guarantee you your porn addiction and your lust is going to become a thing of the past. Thank you guys for watching. It was about time that I made a video about NoFap on this channel. I know I made a video about how pride is the root to all sin, including pride being the root to all lust, but I never made a video about lust specifically. So I'm glad to be giving you guys that today, and I hope you guys learned a thing or two about fleeing sexual immorality. Stay safe, make smart decisions, stay healthy, and stay blessed.